There are about 300 miniature, vacant, man-made islands off the coast of Dubai located in the Persian Gulf. The project called the World Islands, which were artificially made, composed of mainly sand from Dubai's shallow coastal waters. The project was originally thought of in the early 2000s along with many other different Dubai artificial island formations. You can see the different ones, the Palm Islands. The reason I'm talking about the World Islands, it's because it's a very unique project with the idea of about 90% of the islands being virtually abandoned before construction even started, and a lot of these islands haven't seen anyone even step foot on them, and we're going to talk about why that is. Construction of the 300 islands began back in 2003 before being halted due to the financial crisis of 2008. Though around 60% of the islands were sold to private contractors in 2008, development on the islands to this day has not started. The islands within the project range from around 1.4 to 4.2 hectares. Distances between the islands average 100 meters. They are constructed from 321 million cubic meters of sand and 386 million tons of rock. Now you can see the islands as I go over them. I got this video from Google Earth or Google Maps, the aerial shot. Some of them are located right next to each other to where it seems like they were potentially designed to connect via a land bridge. And then some of the other ones are a little bit bigger, a little bit farther away. The idea is when you zoom out on it, it was supposed to emulate the world and the different countries within the world. And the interesting thing is when you look it up on Google Earth, you can see where the different countries would be, and it's just a bunch of nothing. It is just sand, vacant nothingness. And it's like, oh, this is where Russia was going to be. This is where the only area that's actually been developed really is the Europe section, with different resorts sprouting up there. And then there's also a random resort located way away in one of the developments as well. Now, when it comes to the construction of the island, it did start back in 2003, but it took 5 years just to complete the original formation of the over 300 islands, and in 2008, the final stone on the breakwater was laid, completing the development of the artificial islands. There was also one extra island that was developed in July of 2012, a Lebanon island, which was the only island so far that has been developed commercially. It's used for private corporate events and public parties. Now, there have been many difficulties when it pertains to this project, as I'm sure you can surmise with its current state being virtually vacant. The Times Online reported in September of 2009 that work on the World had been suspended due to the effects of the global financial crisis. The Daily Telegraph reported in January of 2011 that an independent company, Penguin Marine, provided verification on the erosion of the islands and the passageways between the islands. Land parcels were supposedly zoned for various uses: estate, mid-density, high-density, resorts, and commercial. And you know what this reminds me of? They do this a lot in China. China will develop a random area, like a random city, and basically do a complete carbon copy of a famous city around the world. Like they have a city with an Eiffel Tower in China. They have a bunch of different stuff. So I think the idea with these islands was to make every island its own country and develop that little area, that little section, that little pod, if you will, because they look like little pods of the island, and make the scenery and landscape really emulate the actual area in terms of the location in real life. So, like the landscape and the architecture in France would be very similar to how France actually looked. That was the idea when it comes to the world and all of the different little artificial islands that were to be created. In December of 2016, the Heart of Europe project made major progress when a Dubai-based company helped develop facilities on 6 different islands in the European portion of the world. And I think along with the financial issues when it comes to these artificial islands, there is a real fear of the islands possibly sinking further, and would an investment into these islands be really worth it? The main reason for the sinking is because the land extracted from the seabed to build the 300 artificial islands was gradually returning to its place of origin. A photograph taken from the International Space Station in February of 2010 showed evidence that, indeed, the waters of the Persian Gulf were rising and the islands were starting to disappear. Now, the artificial islands were mainly constructed on a bed of sand and rock. Despite Dubai being surrounded by desert, marine sand was used to build the artificial islands, which is more appropriate for this type of construction as it is more compact. According to the conclusions obtained from the environmental studies presented, Dubai's beaches lose between 10,000 and 15,000 cubic meters of sand each year. The Palm Islands construction, which has affected the natural flow of wind, has caused the tides to increase this rate of erosion. The result is that marine sediment deposits have moved 40 kilometers over a 5-year period. All of the movement caused during the construction has affected marine biodiversity, burying oyster beds and causing irreparable damage to the coral on the seafloor. And they actually have another project Dubai does. I did a video on it a while ago where they're trying to build the world's biggest artificial coral reef, and there's actually some pretty sweet renderings on that. So they're trying to repair the coral reef by building an artificial one. But yeah, because they've built up all of these artificial islands using a bunch of sand, it has disrupted the natural tides, and it's actually caused more erosion to the islands, and that's part of the reason why these islands are unstable when it comes to potentially building on them, and there's virtually no development because no one really wants to take that risk. Also, you have these things going up at the worst time, with the original shell islands being completed in 2008, right when the financial collapse happened, which really shook the world. It was just kind of really bad timing when it comes to this project, but I do think the number one reason these things really haven't been developed outside of that European area is because of the threat of them sinking further down. So that is the story of the some 300 deserted artificial islands that were supposed to make up the world. Every island was going to be its own country. It is a very cool idea, but it is one of those things where, it's just a very luxurious thing. I mean, who is going to live on those islands or vacation there? It's just going to be really multimillionaires unless you somehow, I guess they could make it a tourist area. There's just so many spots you have to fill up when it comes to that, and they just did not have the buyers, and now nobody wants to touch them because they don't know if it's stable land to build on. Now, one of the islands had a house built onto it. The island was actually supposed to be the country of Greenland, and it was gifted to a race car driver famously back about 10 years ago. And when it comes to the update on these islands in 2023, there really isn't one. Sure, you'll get the one-off article about whatever happened to Dubai's islands, why are they sinking, things like that, but there is no real update when it comes to these islands actually being developed. There is this interesting rendering I want to show. This was from the same group that built up the European area of the world islands. You can see all of the vegetation on the different islands possibly, although that seems like a far out there plan. Probably not going to happen. I'm not exactly sure how you would salvage these islands because people don't want to invest money into them. Maybe the idea would be turning them into some type of ecosystem to where them sinking into the ground really wouldn't matter. The issue is if you're going to build up a bunch of hotels and different shops and restaurants and infrastructure, it becomes an issue if you're building on unstable land, and it's a risk not a lot of people want to take. So unfortunately, the world islands, they dealt with horrible timing in 2008, and they also are dealing with the idea of them sinking. The other islands, you can see the surrounding islands. The one Palm Island is virtually all built up. It took a while to get there. The other Palm Island right now is completely undeveloped, but the idea is they're going to be developing it with construction starting this year throughout 2028. Now, it is Dubai, so stuff always goes abandoned. There's a ton of abandoned construction sites just because there's so many ridiculous projects that never get completed. So maybe that's another island that won't be completed. But when it comes to the world islands, these things are basically completely vacant at this point, and they've been that way since their original completion in 2008. But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.